So we wanted to continue the conversation because there were so many interesting aspects that I think we should take some time to continue and go deeper in some details. I'm really looking forward. Doshi, first of all, to speak about the situation in India in general, how has the situation evolved over the last few weeks?
Silence, total silence.
Mm-hmm.
I have not heard a sound of a car or a honk or a flight airplane in the sky.
Mm.
Second thing is that when you are at home, everybody, most of my friends have been at home. And the question is the restrictions, of movement. It's only now in the last week they have released, now that so you can go like a curfew, that you can leave the house early around 8 o'clock and be back, at not later than 8:39.
Mm.
But still, that there is not much movement. Everything is really quiet. But it is an experience. And I think as an architect or as a living person, active person, it's very important to really think about where are we going. But it was very interesting that the whole world is involved with it.
Mm.
Everywhere you go, everybody says they are almost at home. So as an architect, planner, designer, people like you, how do you really see this? That there is not much activity, but there is a sense of global brotherhood. Global, when you are in crisis, everybody's in crisis. So everybody has one thing common. They all feel this. Then the question, what is the relevance of what we are doing? What is it that the rush that we are all the time busy, or the kind of things that we have, or the way we live, or the way we transact things, or when we conceive designs of things? So I was thinking about it. I have been thinking about, are we not really looking at settlements the way earlier settlements were made? For example, I live in a city which is 3 kilometers away, and it was built, almost 600 years ago. And when I go there, I see the kind of life, the relationship between people, the connection that they have. Even now during lockdown, there are maybe the gates, but after the gate, the life is almost like there are 50 houses, 20 houses, there are clusters. They live full life. They live life together. But if I go and see new development, the life is not the same at all. It is exactly the opposite. Not only you are isolated, but you feel little depressed, alone, lonely. And then you go to the new development which is happening now, are designed by architects or designed by developers. You feel that you are in a place where there is no contact at all. The way earlier buildings were done, they were done with an idea that it is like living life fully. So everything was connected to life. Everything was connected to human qualities. And like moods, changes, ideas happened, the spaces were changed. The spaces were different. So when you go there even today, and if you start imagining the life, you have a chance of knowing how celebrations happen, how relationships happen, how people were spending time together, how they were spending evenings or mornings or festivals together. If you go into the new development, those developments are so structured and so organized that you feel that, actually you have come to a dead place. One is alive, other one is almost not there. And I think this is something which we have to think as architects, planners, designers, and whatnot, that are we really looking at building as a product or a process where it is a living object, where you see life going around. And I think this is something then led me to another question, that if we have the schools today of architecture and design, what kind of school are we talking? Are we talking there again as dimensions, function, and performance, but without really knowing what performance is? So it's almost like standards, of things, prescribed, and you find a product made out of that prescription, which is completely sterile and almost dead. And now, if that is the case, then what is the nature that what we should do? And I'm sure, perhaps in your case there also, you must be pondering over this. So what do you think we have to do? How do you see the approach?
Well, what I think what we should do at the moment is to observe, to observe and learn from the situation, because, and I think that ties in what you were just saying, that we now have a time when we have a situation that we have never faced before.
Yes.
And it's an opportunity as well to observe something which is also a big experiment. No, the governments don't know how to react. There is no recipe how to fight this or to deal with the situation. So we are part, and we observe a social experiment, and we should be very awake and very concentrated in observing how people interact, how we use spaces in different ways. I have to say, I do not have any final lessons from that, because I feel so immersed and so part of it that the only thing we can do now, I think, is really to take in as much as possible, and maybe in a few weeks or a few months, when the time comes to have a more analytical view, then try to develop the right lessons. But what I see as well is that one observation is the silence and the focus on our own private lives, how we deal in our own space where we are sometimes locked in, but also how the cities change, how traffic is changing, how we move differently in the space. I think in India it's still nearly not possible to move in the city. Here in Europe, we have observed that the cities were taken over by bicycles and by public transport, and that there were much less cars, and that if you saw an airplane on the sky, it was really a rare observation. People were nearly applauding when they were reacting as if they see a very rare bird on the sky when you see a plane. And I think that changes your perception very much, no?
But I want to just perhaps slightly shift, and think about your place, or because I remember traveling in Italy and Europe and other places. And then if I imagine today going to those places, maybe the kind of informality that was there, and the joy of gathering, the joy of sitting and joy of chatting. And as against that, you see streets completely empty and there is nobody there at all. And then they don't even tell you the story about what life was. So what I am trying to understand is, do we really plan and on a function which is mechanical, function which is really rigorous, and as if that is the way mechanically it is workable efficiently, but really places where people gather and they can sit down with two people, they can have coffee or they can have something else, and they walk into those meandering streets, slightly off, slightly formal, informal. And I think those things, are we not losing in today's planning, today's theories, that it has to be like that, it has to be controlled for something. So where is life? What I am trying to find out is, are we really living life full size?
Mm-hmm.
Are we just really following something which is written in the book, or which says that it can be only like that and not like this? And where is life?
Mm.
And I think, isn't it necessary for us when we look at, for example, I have a little garden in back of my house, and I see the blossom, and I see the trees, and I see birds coming in, and the colors of flowers. wasn't nature so much controlled and manicured that it lost its glory? Or it should be allowed to grow and flourish, and then, of course, efficiency is there. But is efficiency the most important thing, or it is the living, rejoicing life, opportunities, surprises, discourses, accidental situations which you had never expected? Because this is the way we breathe. Then I thought that maybe this awareness is now not so much because we have really lost our connection with the ground, with the earth. We wear shoes all the time, so we never walk barefoot. We never go and touch anything free. Then we put on a shirt, we put on overcoat, we put all kinds of things, to protect ourselves. Are we all not really lost our human touch to things, to life? Are we not really losing the kind of skin and the pore and the little breeze, that would come, or suddenly you touch something and you are surprised with the temperature? Where are those sensitivities that are happening less? And this, to me, this is very important, because then if we really look at it that way and reverse the cycle, and we said, all right, let's do this, then what has happened today is that silence has brought us together in our own selves, not really together in a real sense. But if there was no silence in ordinary, we were together, mixing, changing. So opportunity for accidental things happening, opportunities for enriching our experiences, discourses, dialogues, sitting on a coffee shop and chatting there. So where is that time gone? We have become too much of time conscious now. That time, we used the time, we were not conscious, but rejoiced. So where is that joy? Where is that pleasure? Where is that excitement which we had before? And as a result, we are talking of energy. We are talking about savings. But are we really saving what? And losing what? And I think these questions to me have become more and more apparent. And if we really take advantage of everybody concerned about common goals, maybe this is a chance to design together something which is meaningful, which combines the virtues of both. And we may try to make a new place. Like previously, civilizations have made their own place. So every time you see a footprint of ancient cities, you begin to see the life. I was in Pompeii years ago, and I remember the ruins, and I could see the life there. And you could not believe how exciting, how emotional, how, what you can call, emotional and touching, the life was full of things. So do we ever would try to do that? Not exactly, but feeling of those things added in, like all those coffee shops and bistros on the footpath and encroachment and traffic jam, I think was such a nice thing. And now we don't get those. We get a regularly plant trees, etc. But we don't get bushes like what you have in Europe and others. There are clusters of trees. Then there are places to sit. Now we will have straight plants. So should we not really look at this as a chance? Let us say at Vitra, we make a workshop, and that workshop talks about really these two scenarios. And then these two scenarios, we make our own observations, and then really look at the third scenario. And it might be an opportunity for Vitra or the agencies together, some institutions together, propose a new way of thinking, combining these two things, the past, the present, and the future. I think this is something which I feel if we can do, then we have got something out of this lockdown.
I'm just thinking about the campus here where our museum is located.
Yes.
To Basel. During the time of the lockdown in the last weeks, since
Yes.
March, what has happened here on the campus is that we have planted a garden, a
Yes.
new garden between different buildings, which is designed by a Dutch designer called Piet Oudolf. And I think this is a very emblematic project because it's, on the one hand, it has to do with the discussions about sustainability and bringing more natural, more organic aspects on this site, which is dominated by wonderful buildings, but nature was missing. So now we created a beautiful site, which still needs time. You know, a garden needs time to develop. But what I'm now noticing it when looking at this garden is that it's also something for ourselves. You know, it's not only a project, an intellectual project to show that we think nature is important, but it's really something for your soul. When you walk through the path, you look at the plants growing, and that, I think, is an element that we really didn't know how much it was missing in between all those beautiful buildings. But now that it's there, you see that everything becomes more connected and more human.
You know, there is another aspect which we never think of, the health or the psychology of people, of the behavior sciences. We study all this. And I think if you ask those experts, they might tell you about the kind of constant regulated situations which create emotional, psychological pressures, and therefore they affect the body, mind, etc., or behavior. If we can look at those things together and see the virtues of both, one is informal, other one is formal, regulated, the other one is chaotic perhaps, but it has much more chance. So if we can do these things, would that not really help in the long run? Not only people, but other things also, our studies, our behavior, our transactions, for example. When we now transact, we talk transactions as efficiencies. We decide and we say conclude and let's finish the day. But old times, you know, you met a friend and he came at the time when you were closing the office, and suddenly you say, oh my God, it's such a long time, we never met. And then you go and sit into some place which is available and you start talking. You don't know how many hours pass by. Now, don't we think that these are the kind of essentials in real life? So, issue would be, is the design which is living, which is enjoyable, and which is nourishing our soul, or it is only doing what we are supposed to do, which has economic and other values?
You, in our talk the last time, which I looked again yesterday, you were mentioning about, you were relating this to creating a plan as an architect. And you mentioned that you questioned, are we creating a plan or don't we want to create life? Is it just a plan?
That's right.
Or is it something we want to create possibilities? And you are also speaking about the open-ended plan, no? Which is something that is not limiting but empowering.
You know, the issue is for me that if we can connect with different situations of life and allow people to really get lost sometimes, it will be a useful thing. Because when you look at the countries, you know, now recent violence and other things happen, they happen because of those frustrations, the hidden things which are blocking them. But if we do this, it might be of great yes. Incidentally, Rolf is asking me to design something, and I have been thinking about it, that how do you really create walking on a barefoot where you touch only the grass and then the brick and then maybe water and maybe something else or something slippery? Do we ever get those things, you know, for our body? Do we really look at things which appear and disappear? Or do we look at light, you know, natural light which is changing? Now, I do those things in my buildings because I cannot afford anything else. So it's an old way of doing. But I think those are the things which are important, because in education, architectural education and others, we have lost all these nuances. And I think those nuances, if we cannot do eventually, what we are going to get is something very sterile. That is my view. I
Yeah.
could be wrong.
Well, at least I agree. And, you know, to me, this also reminds me some approaches of Le Corbusier in architecture. If we think about the modular, where
Yes.
this was about proportion, yes. It was about the human proportion and creating a system of proportion that allows us to relate architecture to man. But also for Le Corbusier, it was more than just mathematics. It was a philosophy, and it was a way to place ourselves within the world, no, with all its different dimensions, and not only dimensions of size, but also dimensions of spirit that play a role.
Yeah, he always talked about this. You know, for example, he would always leave some things incomplete because he would say, let people have pity about this. So the whole question is, you ignore certain things and let accidents happen, pleasant accidents, surprises happen. So there are so many cases, you know, in which I see, having worked with him, there would be certain things which I would leave. And sometimes in a situation like in India, in the work that we do, things, you know, become very important because something else would happen there. So you are adding another story. You know, Louis Kahn, when he used to come here often, and I used to talk to him, and he was fond of Arabian Nights, the books. Now, I was wondering, but then I found that the whole thing is, what is the kind of thing? Are we doing something as a product which has function and which has something to fulfill, or that's the end like a fountain pen? Or are you going to give something by which, you know, some new thing would happen and you get by chance another story to really relish and enjoy? I think, are we going to really think about these things? You know, are we going to really try to create surprises by partly plan, partly letting them happen? And I think the joy of those, because suddenly, you know, Milona's building, he drew, and then he says, oh, in India, the birds fly through. And he drew a bird. And eventually, by luck or whatnot, we have not done some places doors and windows. And the birds go through like in the ancient Indian buildings. It may be also sometimes irritating. But the sudden surprise, I think, is one of the elements of unexpected creativity. And I think that,
I like very much what you say. I think it could even be, you know, even mistakes can sometimes create more progress or advancement than making everything correct, no? And I think, you know, this is what we notice at the moment as well, that this situation has not been wanted by anyone, but it makes us think into directions which we would have never thought they can be realized. Less traveling, more interaction among our families. And I think this all was born out of something which is a failure, but it's a failure that which we should use in the way that it advances us. And I think I like to think about also Le Corbusier, you know, such a giant, building in slight moments of questioning things, or also a projection space for people to relate to his buildings. Maybe it's easier to relate to such a building when you see it's human, also human in the way that it can be wrong in some places, but it makes you feel closer to it.
you know, I was doing 2-3 buildings, you know, for him in Paris, but for Ahmedabad, for clients. One of the things he said is, do them, but don't make them identical. Similar, but not identical, so they have a chance to rejoice and enjoy. What was important for me, and for me even today, is that word rejoicing life. giving life a chance, playing it in such a way that you have an opportunity to pity the creator, feeling that, well, maybe he made a mistake. Now, all those things are human gestures. And I think those gestures I like, because then they create unexpected situations when you have a big city, when you have a plan, everything else, but you have a chance for somebody else to come and add on to this. So we are also creating chances for future participation and unexpected events. So the structure cannot be really so uniform that it doesn't allow the new things to come in and become part and parcel. As if you know that in a river, a new small river comes and joins that river and becomes one of the flowing rivers. And I think those kinds of things which we see in nature always, why can't we not really think about them? I'm sure this lockdown is a break chance for that. Now we are becoming we are working with network. So internet now being used all the time. So we are now getting disconnected in one way, but connected in another way. And it's an infinite potential. So here is now a chance with the new technology that there could be some chances to invent openings and closures and really create something unexpected. So I see this as an advantage if we follow the kind of things that are happening.
No, I totally agree. And I think, what you describe as, let's call it a design principle, even in work like Le Corbusier's, also in yours, is also about creating links, creating connections, allowing people to connect.
That's right.
And I like to think also of Le Corbusier as someone who created connections in that way between people and architecture and even cities, but also between people. And when I prepared our talk today, I found in our catalog a letter that Le Corbusier wrote about you when he wrote to Louis Sert, the Spanish architect.
Yes.
And, and if you don't mind, I can just quickly read something that was in that letter. Is that okay for you?
Sure. Go ahead.
Yes, because I liked it so much, and it relates to what you mentioned. You mentioned the building in Ahmedabad and the mill owners building. And so Le Corbusier writes to Louis Sert. He writes to Sert, I therefore request you to check in the volume 6 of Œuvre Complète Le Corbusier, the work done by Doshi in my workshop, the Shodan Villa on page 134, the Mill Owners Association building on page 145. He has done all the drawings of these buildings. Moreover, he went to Ahmedabad to supervise construction, and he equally supervised construction of the Sarabhai Villa. In short, I can say that it's a pleasure for me to recommend Doshi, who has excellent moral values, intellectual capacities, and a good technical sense. So, that I liked that letter because it shows how Le Corbusier also created connections for people. He liked to connect you as a young Indian architect coming to Paris, working with him, with somebody like Sert, who at that time was in the United States. I think he was in Yale. And he ends that letter with saying, I'm sure that it would be in his interest, in Doshi's interest, to receive, quote, the American shock.
Yes.
And that the contacts would be extremely beneficial for those who deal with him, like Siegfried Didion. So he recommended you to Sert to give you the American shock and to create something else for you, which would be something unexpected, and that would enlarge your experiences.
It is not that only, it is because of that letter we are talking together, here in this video about the kind of present, future, etc. Otherwise, I would never have been here meeting you at all. But most important thing I learned from him was, in every day, every moment, there are open gaps by chance. use them, note them, create something else out of them. And I think when we do that, we have added a new dimension to what we had preconceived. And that preconception, the new conception, gives us another idea to do something else. So you're all the time rejoicing every moment that you put in step, because one step on the other side by mistake will take you to another route, but give you a glimpse. We believe in destiny in India. And I think that destiny is wandering freely. Allow your heart to flow, your instinct to draw. And when we do that, there is another power which works, and that power is helping you around. And I think when we talk about Corona and this and that, these are all small, little, tiniest things, but for us, inside us, there is a whole lot of this. So when we have this kind of dialogue, suddenly in those dialogues, there are gaps. And I think if those gaps we can take the benefit without questioning, our heart would open much more. And we would be richer.
I think these are beautiful descriptions how one can get to unknown places, no? To move to some place where we haven't been yet in our fantasy, in our creation. And I think if we compare this, what you describe, with, you know, recipes of innovation today, which is very much about technology, about rationality, I think the answer that you are giving is that innovation, or we shouldn't call it like that, maybe it's, you know, change or the unexpected is inside us, you know. It's not something we can buy, or we can we cannot force it, but we can behave in a way that we make it possible. And I think that's a beautiful, it's not depending on money, it's not depending on where on earth you are, it's really depending on how you behave.
Actually, lockdown is one such case. I look at it that way. Initially, I was frustrated, but over time, days together, not going to the office, going nowhere else, you know, you're quiet, your friends, you far away, everybody's far away. But then there are certain discoveries that I made. And I think those I would not have done if I was not in the lockdown position. Because there is enough in us, in everybody, to get something more, which is, the treasure is lying hidden deep inside us. And we don't get time. We always say, let me find time. And we always get occupied. But in this case, there's no occupation. There is nothing you can do. And that big chest, you know, that treasure chest opens up, and it gives us something else. And I think that is what we are doing today, you know. So I am so glad, you know, that we have a chance and you have arranged this gathering together.
Yes, no, it's a big pleasure, Doshi, to speak to you. You know, what I found when I cleaned up some drawers here in my office, where I'm right now, as I had some time, and what I found was something we used for an exhibition opening when we had an exhibition of Le Corbusier. You know, we had this for everyone who was coming. So all the visitors were getting this, and there was so everyone was feeling a little bit like Corbu. So these are things that you find sometimes, you know, when you look in these old drawers with things from many years ago. Doshi, when we prepared the talk, you also mentioned that you wanted to speak about the elements in architecture, which I found very interesting, because now we have already started to speak about something, a kind of alchemy in architecture or in art in general. But you said that also in India, especially, the 5 elements, fire, water, earth, wind, space, are very central. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, what we call them as Pancha Mahabhuta, 5 eternal elements in the cosmos.
Mhm.
It is not only that, it is the connection with our body and our psyche. So whenever we do rituals, whenever we have prayers, or whenever we have ceremonies, we respect them and we call them. For example, 5 elements like earth, water, sun, sky, rain, clouds.
Mhm.
So all those and all these elements are eternal and they have been there for all along. And we revere them very often. When we revere them, we always relish them and feel about them. The whole idea is they also dwell in our body. Our body has those. And what I learned from them was that if I think about them in designing architecture, then the space gets light, space gets air, the space gets smell. So all those things come back and architecture then becomes alive. So important thing is in our Vastu that we call as an environmental science, the idea is they are the essential elements because the air, if you get properly at the proper place, if the light you get where it is required and how much intensity it has, if the rains are available and you can hear the sound and you can smell the fresh fragrance of the earth or the flowers, and if you can get really what you can call the connection with the sky, all those things become very important. And if we can absorb them, I think our condition thinking modifies. In fact, today's all the medical sciences talk about biology, and biotechnology and others, saying that how do you really use your body, your cyclic order, your senses. The other thing that I found was that when you really look at them but use them, for example, if one was saying you go to meet the doctors and others, they say, why don't you walk on grass? Or why don't you really go and do this fresh air exercise? Or why don't you look at the sun and sit in the sun? All those things actually are constituting elements in our body and in the cosmos. And they help us. They help us calm down. They help us think better. They help us to nourish things. And I think now new books are coming about psychology, psychoanalysis, the synchronicity. Then they talk about really anxieties. All those things are really part and parcel. So important thing is we are talking about what you call rational, simple things which are in the program and which we want to solve. So we are really doing what is functionally required and we find a functional solution. But actually there are so many other things which are required. Like how do you, nowadays they talk about meditation, they talk about chanting, they talk about breathing. Now all those things are what you call psychic, elements which affect. So those are the kind of things that I was brought up in my childhood. And those I feel are very, very useful. And those the ones I talked even to Louis Kahn when we were talking. For example, Kahn would draw his drawings as if he did not want to hurt the tracing paper. And that is also using charcoal, mind you. So he was using that charcoal so light. And I asked him that one day question. I said, Lou, why you do? He says, because I don't want to hurt the paper. And because he was holding it light, the charcoal began to speak the story. See, you have a medium inside you and you allow that medium to manifest. So creator is not you. And you do that. For example, the Chinese paint, the brush, they never touch even their hand. So they're floating. So the idea is concentration. Idea is getting this together. So in this Panchamahabhuta, if you try to look at them, your house or your place that you design as an architect would always have all these things which would be very nourishing. Because when the seasons change, the flowers happen, the plants change. Otherwise, you are constantly in one climate, one condition. So those are the things which we don't talk in function. But those are the ones which are required by a creative artist to put in to make it complete. And I think this is something which I do. And it makes you more sensitive also.
It's interesting what you say about Louis Kahn drawing with charcoal. I mean, many people certainly know some of his drawings. And charcoal is interesting to see a relation between the charcoal as a drawing medium and his works, no, which are often made of bricks, and charcoal is also sourced from the earth. So there's a relation of the way how, or with what tool you design it and with what material you build it. I think it's very connected and certainly very different.
It's a question of consciousness. I think, are we really conscious about what we are, who we are, where we are going, or we are just tools? And I think that is what is indicative of his way of working.
Doshi, when you were speaking about the elements coming from Indian tradition, can you maybe give some examples of how you have applied them in some of your buildings or integrated them? If we see, for example, the Indian Institute of Management with the big open spaces inside the building, when you create a building, what is your process to bring in those elements or to consider those elements in the design? I think that is very interesting for many of our audience who may be architects, and to understand how can that become part of the process of working.
Actually, the process is very personal. First of all, I think building is not required, but if it is required, the function which has been described and written is really not the true function. Those are all measurable working conditions. But the fact that you are in that building and you are going to walk from one place to the other place, you are also going to see around, turn your head here or there, and then you are going to look at perhaps open space or enclosed space, etc. So you are not working as a robot, but then you are in a building and then you become a human being. And then if we add on to that extra spaces and to move or to take your eyes far away, you become a child and you want to go even farther than what you are supposed to go. If you add to that the world which I have found in Indian temples, etc., that the columns are not columns only. The building speaks. There are images attached to the column. There are faces of animals into the columns. And it means, that they bring all the world inside. So one is in the building, but that building is a cosmic force. All the cosmos is with you. So question is, am I going to the building to rejoice, to discover, to linger, to get lost, or I'm going from task A to task B? So issue would be, what is the meaning of life and time to you? We never think of that. But I think about it when I started to design like the Institute of Management. I added pergolas and now there are plantation and the whole creepers have come inside and it has changed the whole place totally. Everybody who goes there, they never feel that they are in the same place again. So idea is the building that we design, is it constantly changing, giving you another vista, telling you another story, taking you to another place that you had never thought of? So is function measurable only, or the function has many unmeasurable dimensions? Should we really not think that how people can get lost so that they can reach into the class some other way, or they can surprise contact with somebody else by chance? So do we really think about accidents, positive accident encounters to interject your life so that suddenly you get a different kind of idea? Architecture is not just measurable. Kant talked about the unmeasurable qualities of architecture. And that unmeasurable is the unexpected, the undescribable. Suddenly you find not only the plant there, but the rains have come in, and you find the rains next to you, and you look at those drops, and those drops make something. In today's life, we only read what we have to read. We do what we have to do. So our function of foot is doing what its work is, hand is doing what its work supposed to be. But actually there are many, many things. They talk about life. Everything is living. Everything is like children. And I think if we can do that, our fatigue would get less. We would have surprised encounters. We may lose time but gain somewhere else. We might get more relaxed. We might find something else to do than what we have been planning to do. I think these are essential things, otherwise, why should there be many kinds of foods, on a dining table, on a buffet? Or do you get regularly the same sandwich, and coffee, and you continue life? I think those are the things which affected me. And other thing that I found was architecture is not just what the client wants. He wants something else to his life which he doesn't know, neither is expecting. But that architect's job is that. And incidentally, I was talking to Rajiv other day that the Baroque architecture, the Palladian villas, they did not show you the park and the garden, but they painted the murals and the heavens in the ceiling, and they brought the heavens down. I think that is architecture. Architecture is when you get something more. You get illusion. But that illusion is so good that you don't need anything else. So don't we really think about surprise in our demands? Should we not talk about something which is nonsense in a sense, not functional, but something which will get lost? Can't we ever become younger children and get lost? Or we have to be always grown up and walk exactly the way we have planned? It's not a military camp, it's not an army thing. So to me, these are the things I did. And in IIM, I did a lot of corridors. And when the clients had asked me a question, what is your image of this campus, the board members? I said, I am thinking about the Madurai temple. And I'm going to give you a temple, contemporary temple. So suddenly they agreed because they were fascinated by the temple, religious, whatnot. But luckily to me, that helped. And I broke all the rules. And today, after 50 years now, they are thinking one of the best things. They are happy all the time. They are happy because the journey has become unexpected. That journey is changing all the time with the light, shadow, the tree growth, rains. Encounters become because they always want to go by another route to know whether something else has happened. So that inquiry, that self-journey, that self-discovery is not prescribed in the program. And neither it is required every day. So should we not really create things in which we get lost? Not much, but at least some loss. I think the surprise is what is missing. And I am very glad that I could do that in India and it happened. And I learned this from both of them, Khan and Corbusier.
And I think it's, when looking at the Institute of Management, it's also surprising because if you look at it from the perspective that at the time when it was built, education and universities were still much more conservative than they are today. You know? Today we might feel this is a very contemporary way of seeing education, but I think a few decades ago it must have been quite revolutionary to introduce this element of surprise and unexpectedness into education, which at that time was still very top down. No, it was about
Actually,
learning.
I don't think that much, because when I met the board members and I was telling them that architecture is also a journey.
Mm.
Experiencing architecture is traveling into different places. And when I told them that I want to do something by which you will never feel you are in the same place again, or at least slightly different place. And the space is not static, space is dynamic. Other thing that I mentioned was about surprising encounters. You encounter only people, you encounter material, you encounter light sky, but you never encounter a changing tree, a sudden flower, into a place. Now, those are the things which, when I talked to them, they were very surprised and they were happy because they were in education. And they were thinking about how do you find more ways to allow people to become aware. And I think that awareness is nowadays missing in our daily life, daily routine, and daily function, because we have to function during times and places and whatnot. But I think that is really when you have to then eventually go to a hospital. It's better to go to a kindergarten.
No, when we were speaking about the unexpected in the process of designing a building, but also in using a building. But I think the unexpected also comes in when the building is made, no, when it's built. And you were mentioning another topic after our last talk, which you were interested to explore further, which is the role of the craftsman and the people who are involved in making the building.
Yes.
Who always bring in their personal elements. And I liked your interest in the role of the craftsman, because it shows again that you see the building also as a collective work to which many people contribute with different skills and with different lessons they have learned.
In Indian situation, there are other considerations why this happened. We have economic constraints. Mm-hmm. The plans are initially thought of by one director. Eventually, directors change over time. Funds stop. Funds have to come back again. Mm. So uncertainty is one of the major elements in Indian work. For an architect, whether he's doing a house or a palace or an institute, he may have a big image. He wants to have a good image. He wants to do something which he can imagine, but he can't afford. Mm. So there is a big gap into that time. And in that time, what can an architect do? His architect can only do is create those openings so that as and when the time comes and situation changes, you can add on there what your dream was in a different way. So the question would be, is the architect's role of becoming finite, or the architect gives you open-ended situations in which the client can perform what he was missing? And I think you're giving him another element, fulfilling something which is not expected in the changing time.
So what is the role of the craftsman today in these building processes?
Well, now the craftsmen are much less, because we do concrete work and in fact those stone work. But there are craftsmen used on the smaller buildings, smaller institutions, and where the economy is different and things go slow. And there are craftsmen who are specialized. For example, in South, you will find craftsmen who are specialized and they can deliver you what you want by creating those. Otherwise, but the skill of inventing, when I was doing or when Corbusier or Kahn were doing, we had to invent everything because that was the beginning of those pioneering work. We had a couple of hundred, 40, 50, 100 people working on site. The site work was going very slow. Kahn's buildings took 12 years. Corbusier's buildings took a couple of years, but we had people, who never knew how to read plans. But that gave a chance to not follow the contemporary architecture at that time. And that gave me another chance to create something else and reinterpret the definition of architecture. And that was the time I found that architecture is then a living organism and it is not really a static thing. It is not pre-designed. It is a livable thing. And then when I had to do that exhibition, I called it into a habitat. Because function, how do you define that function over 2 years or 3 years or 5 years? It's not a laboratory. It's not a factory of production. It is actually a creative place. So when a student is there and then he graduates and comes back again, he sees a change and he finds that he has come to another place. So why we have to fix or freeze images, freeze experiences? I think truly our living is constantly evolving, constantly enriching, exciting. And I think that is something which I enjoy most. And therefore, I really enjoyed my 20 years on one project where 4 directors changed. And each director had different demands. And I had to fulfill those demands. So I got a chance to modify what I wanted to modify, what I had designed. So I took this as a virtue. Delay, circumstantial problems, situations where craftsman or a contractor has changed, a client has changed the program. And I would welcome that because I want to learn something. I want to break this rule that architecture is finite. Architecture is only this function. And that is where I learned all this. Addition, change, modification, patience.
I think now we are all in the situation that we are confronted with these challenges, which are also opportunities.
Yes.
We can't plan. We have to plan from day to day at the moment.
I know.
We have to forget about recipes of the past. So this is why, me, for example, running a museum during the last 3 months, this was as difficult as probably it was for you to, stay involved in the Sangat studio, trying to, how do you keep your projects running? How do you keep work ongoing? And we discover that it's the way how we would have reacted years ago, it doesn't work anymore. So we're really forced to invent ways of moving from situation to situation. I think of course it's very tiring, it's very demanding, but I feel it's such a rich time as well.
The way I look at it is that what you're saying is absolutely right and correct. But the only way to not get tired and the only way to rejoice the situation, which is very critical, almost scary, is to really look other way around. And then that is how all the sculptors have invented their sculptures by changing the heads and putting them in another place. So the idea is, how do I enjoy my life, whatever the situation is? So I have to do an acrobat. I can do something else and try. Otherwise, what else can you do? I mean, you're right. I remember the exhibition at Vitra. You have deadlines, you have everything. I knew how Kushnu was working. And it must be very, very tiring, scary, and you have to have a deadline because people are going to come on the opening day. There's no choice. But then the question is, if I kept the gaps in between, and let something loose and not touch it, I have a chance to create that crisis and meander through that place, perhaps. Of course, I am not the curator, so I know what Kushnu must be saying, that I am saying something which is completely ridiculous. But what I'm trying to say is, situations are going to happen, but theory which is going linear, I don't agree to that, because real life is in uncertainties. And there are uncertainties which are really the virtues. And those virtues are very important. So this uncertain time today, for me, is a good time to reflect and really ask that, is what I consider right, is this appropriate, or there is something else? Is this really an God-sent opportunity to rediscover something that I was not sure of?
Doshi, do you still want to answer a few questions to finish with? Because we have received a lot of questions. Is that okay for you?
Okay, okay.
Yes,
sure.
A lot of people sent questions here, and so it's nearly 20 questions, so I have to choose a few.
Okay, sure.
So Doshi, one question from Artie Gomes on Instagram. He says, or she is asking, sir, tell us about art in architecture. So you're also working as a painter. You are working in both fields. What can you say to this listener?
I think life itself is an art, if you discover something else, when things constantly change, when things fascinate you and you find something which you think you know, and by chance you discover something else, to me that is an art. That is an art, that is a discovery. So art is not something which is drawn and the image which we see all the time. That is, of course, in the book of art, it is preconceived. There is a history of artists and history of culture, history of things. But for me, art is a discovery, a delightful discovery, a discovery which I am enchanted. And I want to look at it again and again. That is to me art.
There's another question from someone who is asking, so what are your tips for students that go into the first year of architecture this year? What would you give them as an advice?
I think they should travel. They should travel to places, unknown places, study them, study how they are used, study how their lifestyles are, study how their climate is, study how their economies are, what do they do, and how do they survive. I think these are very important issues. Whether you go to tribal area or you go to a metropolitan city, you will see different things. We have, as a creative person, be connected to life per se. I think we have not to just see in photographs, but experience. I think ideal would be that they must spend physical, emotional, psychological time and absorb, because there is something to discover in every experience. I think a lot of movies when we see so many things. How do they discover? I think unless we become participant, it is not good.
Yeah.
Not observation alone. Yeah.
One last question from another listener who was asking, what is your view on the relation of landscape and architecture? So if we put it more generally, the structure of the natural structure and the architecture that is integrated. What is your view of that
I
relationship?
think landscape is all the time dynamic, changing, constantly changing color, form, shape, and building is completely static. So I think both together really make a marriage.
Mm.
And I think without other, it doesn't work.
Mm. Yeah.
So togetherness is very important. Don't dissect them isolated. Make them integral.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that is good enough.
Well, I'm sure it is. And it was such a delightful conversation, Doshi. I would love to continue for much longer, but I would suggest we continue in the next session.
Yes.
As we have decided when we spoke the first time that we would do this from time to time. And I think that's wonderful to do it in
I
several
think Matthew
talks.
was so good. I am sure, Matthew, that you are so busy in Vitra and your work and your publications and whatnot, and you still find time to spend time with us as a dialogue and for others. I think so. Thank you so much for doing it. And of course, we would both, if we enjoy, will continue these dialogues.
Thank you very much, Doshi. For me, it's a way, as you said before, to have pleasure while working. It's not.
Always.
I don't see it
Yes,
as
yes.
It's not a duty. It's for me. In this time, there's also aspects of work which are difficult, but this part shows me what a beautiful job I have. I can speak to people like you on the other end of the world about the most important themes in life. So what better thing can there be? I'm really happy about that.
No, I am equally happy, and maybe I just want to know, are there many participants in this? People who are watching this?
Yes. I mean, now we had about 200 people all over the world. So I think this is wonderful. The last time there were even much more. So I think it's depending on the time of the day, but this is such a discovery to do a conversation in that format, which before would have meant for you or for me to travel to Europe or to India.
No, this is fantastic.
It's very sustainable. It's very spontaneous. We can agree to do that a few days before. And I think this is one of these discoveries that we have made over the past weeks that will also change how we can interact with each other. And when
this is the future. This is actually the future. More and more dialogues would happen. More new things every time we have a new idea we can explore. And we will continue learning and discovering and rejoicing.
Absolutely.
So, thank you. Yeah.
So let's continue that, Doshi.
Matthew, yes. Thank you, Matthew.
What I wanted to mention to our audience is that the exhibition we made about your work, Doshi, and which has been brilliantly curated by your granddaughter, Kushnu Hov, is now again on view at the Architecture Center in Vienna. So to everyone who is listening now, there's the exhibition still in Vienna, and then it will be shown in Chicago. I think at the end of the year, for sure, also a big part of next year. So I'm super happy that the exhibition is continuing to travel. And there's also this beautiful book, which we put together and which was edited by Kushnu, your granddaughter, and which has also wonderful text by yourself, Doshi. So it's
but Matthew, all that you are doing, I can't thank you less. I think what you're saying is fantastic. So I'm very grateful, and on behalf of Kushnu also, I want to thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thanks to you, Doshi, that you have found the time, and let's continue that conversation soon again.
We will.
Yes?
We will continue. Sure, with pleasure.